In the heart of a forgotten forest where no map dares to reach and the wind speaks in whispers, one man stepped beyond the edge of the known world. What he found wasn't a monster, but a miracle, a towering being made of light and silence, watching, waiting. Their meeting wasn't just a discovery. It was a moment that could change everything. Would you follow the path if it meant risking everything for something no one would ever believe? If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Let's move toward wonderful story. Darren walked carefully through the thick forest, his boots barely making a sound on the soft earth. Around him, tall trees stretched high into the sky, their wide branches creating a ceiling of green. Sunlight slipped through the leaves in patches, falling gently on the moss-covered ground. The air smelled of damp wood, old bark, and something sweet he couldn't name. It was quiet here. Not the kind of quiet that felt empty, but the kind that seemed full of waiting. The kind that made you feel like the trees were watching. He had left behind the last signs of civilization 2 days ago. His map ended miles back, but Darren had not turned around. He didn't come looking for trails or signs. He came looking for something that couldn't be found in books or photographs. There was a story he had heard once, whispered late one night by a traveler passing through the village. The man spoke of a creature tall as 2 men, with skin that shimmered like water and eyes that seemed to hold the sky. Most people had laughed or dismissed the tale, calling it foolish. But something about the story had stayed with Darren, not because it sounded unbelievable, but because it felt true in a way he couldn't explain. Darren had always been drawn to things others ignored. As a child, he would wander into fields alone, chasing insects or studying birds. He asked too many questions, poked into shadows, and stayed out long after dark. Now, years later, that same curiosity had brought him here, to a place few dared enter. He carried a small bag with some food, a water flask, and a worn notebook filled with sketches and notes. But more than anything, he carried a deep hope that something waited in these woods, something beautiful and unknown. The forest grew denser as he moved forward. Vines wrapped around tree trunks like slow-growing serpents, and strange flowers bloomed in places where no sunlight reached. The path beneath his feet had vanished completely, replaced by a bed of fallen leaves and soft roots. Darren slowed his steps, not wanting to disturb anything. The silence seemed to grow heavier with each step, but he didn't feel afraid. He felt watched, yes, but not threatened. There was a difference, and he could sense it clearly. Then, as the sky began to turn gold with the coming sunset, he saw it. A shape, barely visible through the trees, tall and still. His heart leapt and he froze, unsure if it was real. He blinked. It didn't move. Slowly, carefully, he took one step closer, then another. The figure became clearer, a tall being standing at the edge of a small clearing where the light touched the ground in soft, golden waves. She was unlike anything Darren had ever seen. Her skin held a faint glow as if lit from within, and shimmered with soft colors that shifted like the surface of a pond. Her limbs were long and slender, her posture still but graceful. Darren didn't speak. He didn't dare. His breath caught in his chest as their eyes met. Hers were large and dark, deep like an ocean before a storm. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Darren could feel his heart beating, not fast with fear, but slow and strong, like it understood the importance of this moment. He didn't reach for his camera. He didn't take notes. He simply raised his hand, palm open, a sign of peace and wonder. She tilted her head slightly as if trying to understand him. Then slowly she mirrored his gesture, lifting her own hand to meet his. They stood like that, 2 beings from different worlds, connected by nothing more than stillness and the space between them. Darren felt a strange warmth rise in his chest. Not heat from the air, but something softer, deeper. It was the feeling of being seen without judgment, of being known without explanation. The moment passed as quietly as it had come. The figure took a small step back, her eyes still watching his. She turned, not quickly but with a gentle motion, as if inviting him to follow. Darren hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. He didn't know where she would lead him, or what waited beyond the trees, but he knew he had to see. The need to understand, to witness something beyond the limits of his world, pulled him forward. As she moved ahead, her steps made no sound. She seemed to glide rather than walk, her form blending with the colors of the forest. Darren followed, carefully, avoiding branches and leaves. The path ahead was unknown, hidden and wild, but he felt no fear. Instead, he felt something rare and precious, a sense of beginning, like he was stepping into a story that had waited a long time to be told. Behind him, the last light of the sun slipped away. Before him, the forest deepened, and with it, the promise of something extraordinary. Darren followed the glowing figure deeper into the forest, his steps careful and his breath held tight. The trees grew taller here, their trunks wide and ancient, their leaves forming a thick ceiling overhead. Light barely reached the forest floor now, but the soft glow from the being ahead of him lit a narrow path. She moved without sound, like mist rolling through grass, her long limbs brushing past branches and vines that seemed to move aside for her. Darren's heart pounded, but not from fear. It was the feeling of standing on the edge of something rare, something the world had forgotten. He didn't know what she was or where she came from. He only knew that he had never seen anything like her. Her presence felt calm, like still water on a quiet lake. Though they had not spoken a word, something unspoken passed between them. Each time she looked back to make sure he was still behind her. Her eyes met his with quiet purpose. They were dark, but not empty. They shimmered softly, deep and wide, like rivers that carried memories instead of water. Soon they reached a small clearing where the trees opened up just enough to let the moonlight in. The forest seemed to breathe here. Everything felt alive but peaceful. Darren stopped as she turned to face him again. She stood tall, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held something like curiosity. He didn't know what to do, so he stood, still, unsure if he should speak or wait. She stepped closer, slowly and with care, as though not to frighten him. The soft light from her skin made her seem both real and unreal, like a dream you couldn't quite wake from. Darren raised his hand, again palm open as he had done before. She looked at it for a moment, then reached out her own. When their hands touched, a quiet warmth passed between them. Not heat, but a kind of energy, gentle and steady. Darren felt a sudden rush of something he couldn't name. It was like a memory that wasn't his. Images filled his mind, shapes, of trees taller than any he had seen, wide rivers flowing under stars, beings like her moving through forests with quiet strength and grace. He didn't understand how, but he knew the images came from her. Through their touch, she was showing him pieces of her world, and she was feeling his as well. In return, Darren thought of home. He remembered city streets filled with people and noise, the tall buildings, the glow of screens, and the quiet places he had always searched for in the middle of it all. Somehow she saw it. Her eyes softened as if she could feel what he felt. The loneliness, the longing to find something untouched, something real. They stood there, still joined by touch, as their worlds passed between them in silence. Darren felt tears rise behind his eyes, not from sadness, but from the beauty of it all. It was the first time in his life he felt fully understood without needing to explain. The creature before him, this guardian, this being, was not just watching him. She was listening without sound. After a while, she slowly let go of his hand, though the warmth of her touch stayed in his skin. She took a step back and looked at him again. Then she did something unexpected. She pointed to herself and then to him, her face tilted slightly, as if asking a question. Darren didn't have the words to answer. He simply placed his hand on his chest and nodded, a gesture to say, "I'm here. I'm listening. I mean no harm." Her eyes lit up for a moment, and then she made a soft sound. It wasn't like any word Darren had heard before. It was more like a tone, gentle and smooth, like wind through leaves. It felt like a greeting, something ancient and kind. Darren smiled, unsure what else to do. He replied with a soft, "Hello," not expecting her to understand, but hoping she would feel his intent. She made another sound, a bit louder this time, and the air between them seemed to carry it farther than sound should travel. It wrapped around him like a warm breeze. Duran could sense meaning behind the tones, though he didn't know the exact words. He closed his eyes, letting the feeling of it wash over him. It wasn't speech. It was something more honest. She stepped closer again and gently touched the side of his face with her fingertips. At her touch, more images flooded his thoughts. Visions of her life, her people, the quiet beauty of her forest home. And again, he responded by opening his mind, showing her his memories. He didn't hide the pain, the noise, or the confusion of his world. He showed her the good with the bad, the laughter, the stars above his house, the books that made him dream. She saw it all. They stayed like that for some time, sharing without needing to speak. Then, just as quietly as it had begun, the moment started to fade. She pulled her hand away and stepped back. Darren felt the loss immediately, but he didn't move. She looked at him once more, then turned toward the forest and walked into the trees, her glow slowly fading into the darkness. Duran stood still, the night air cool around him. He was filled with something he couldn't explain. He had come looking for a story, but what he found was something greater, a connection that reached beyond language, beyond fear, something gentle and true. He knew he had only seen the beginning, and whatever lay ahead, he would follow. Darren returned to the forest. The next day, drawn by something he couldn't ignore, the memory of her touch still lingered in his skin, and the images she had shared played again and again in his mind. The world outside the forest suddenly felt dull and heavy, like it had forgotten how to breathe. But inside the trees he felt lighter, as if he was a part of something older and wiser than anything he had known. He walked the same path, trusting his feet to carry him where they needed to go. The forest seemed to welcome him now, opening quiet spaces between the trees and guiding him with soft light through the canopy. He found her waiting in a wide circle of trees, where the ground was covered in moss like a green carpet. She stood, still when he entered, but her eyes warmed when she saw him. Darren stopped a short distance away and bowed his head slightly. It felt like the right thing to do. She stepped forward and reached out, not touching him this time, but moving her hand in a slow flowing pattern through the air. Lines of soft blue light followed her fingers, hanging in the air like ribbons made of mist. Darren watched, fascinated, as the shapes floated and then faded slowly. She was speaking, not with words but with motion and light. He tried to copy her, lifting his own hand and tracing a simple curve in the air. No light followed his fingers, but she smiled. She moved her hand again, this time making a shape like a circle, then pointed to the sky. Darren looked up and saw the sun shining through a gap in the trees. She was showing him something, how her people used shape and motion as a kind of language, a language without sound, but full of meaning. Over. The next few hours they practiced this strange way of speaking. She taught with patience, showing him how to move slowly and with purpose. When Darren made a mistake, she laughed, not in a cruel way, but like a friend enjoying a shared game. Her laughter was soft, musical, and filled the space between them with warmth. The forest seemed to echo with it, as if it approved of their growing bond. They walked together through the woods, and she pointed out things he had never noticed before. Plants that glowed faintly in the shadows, small creatures that moved like flickers of light, trees that made soft tones when the wind passed through them. This place was alive in a way he had never understood, and she was part of it, not just living in the forest but connected to it, like a thread woven into every leaf and root. Darren told her about his world as best he could, drawing simple pictures in the dirt, using hand signs and showing her objects from his bag. He showed her his notebook filled with sketches and notes. She turned the pages with care, her eyes wide with interest. When she saw a drawing of her own glowing figure, she touched it gently, her fingers resting on the paper for a long moment. Then she looked at him, her expression quiet and thoughtful. Later, as they sat beside a stream that shimmered in the fading light, Darren spoke about the machines and noise of his world. He told her how people often ignored nature, how they built over it, forgetting its value. She listened closely, her gaze never leaving his face. He could tell she didn't like what she heard. Her expression changed, the glow on her skin dimming, slightly. There was sadness there and something else, worry. He tried to explain that not all people were like that some still cared. He showed her a photo of his parents in a garden, smiling and holding hands. Her face softened and she reached out to touch the photo gently. It seemed to comfort her, but Darren could see the doubt in her eyes. She was afraid of what his kind could bring, afraid that if others found her world, they would not treat it with respect. That night the forest grew still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Darren felt a weight pressing down on him, not fear, but the sense that something important had changed. The bond between him and the glowing figure had grown stronger, deeper, but with it came the knowledge that it was fragile. A single wrong step could break everything. She led him to a place where the trees grew so close that the stars above looked like tiny lights trapped in a woven roof. There, she made one last sign with her hands, a pattern of light that moved, like falling water. It was a message, one he could feel but not fully understand. He nodded, placing his hand over his heart, hoping she could feel what he meant, that he would protect her secret, whatever it took. As they parted, Darren looked back once, catching one last glimpse of her glowing figure blending into the night. She raised her hand slowly in goodbye. He did the same. The forest closed behind him, but the connection remained. It pulsed inside him like a quiet rhythm, a reminder that something incredible had begun, and that the path ahead would not be easy, but it would be worth every step. Darren woke before dawn, the sky outside still dark with just the faintest promise of light. He couldn't sleep. The images from the night before stayed with him. The gentle movement of her hands in the air, the quiet warning in her eyes, and the glowing trails that faded too quickly. He felt it deep inside. Time was running short. The forest, once peaceful and full of quiet magic, now felt different. There was tension in the air, a stillness that wasn't calm but alert. Something was coming, and Darren didn't need words to know it. He had stayed longer than he meant to. Each day spent in the forest had pulled him deeper into a world that didn't belong to his people, a world that had survived without human touch for what seemed like forever. But now, that world had been touched by him, and he wasn't sure if that was a gift or a mistake. He packed his bag slowly, carefully, folding the notebook that now held not just drawings and notes, but pieces of a story no one would believe. He didn't know if he'd ever return to his city the same person, or if he wanted to. The journey to the glade took longer than usual. The forest didn't guide him as gently as it had before. The light through the trees felt colder and strange. Calls echoed in the distance. When he reached the familiar clearing, he stopped short. She was already there, standing with her back to him, her glow dimmer than before. Darren approached quietly, not wanting to startle her, but she turned as if she had known all along he was coming. There was no smile on her face this time, no soft laugh or playful gesture. Instead, her eyes were heavy with something like sorrow. Darren knew then that she had felt it too, the disturbance, the nearing presence of others. He opened his mouth to speak, to try and explain, but she raised her hand gently, stopping him. In silence, she stepped forward and placed her hand over his heart. It was a simple gesture, yet it said more than words ever could. She trusted him. Despite everything, she believed he had not come to harm her world. A sound broke the moment, the crunch of footsteps far away but growing closer. Darren turned sharply, his heart pounding. He knew those steps. A search party. Someone had followed him, or maybe just tried to find where he had gone. Either way, they were coming, And if they saw her, if they saw what he had seen, it would all change. Maybe forever. He looked back at her, panic rising in his chest. She didn't speak. She didn't run. She just looked at him with those deep, endless eyes waiting for him to decide. Darren stepped forward and took her hand, holding it tightly for a brief second. Then he let go and whispered, "Go." She didn't move. "Please," he said, again. "You have to hide." Finally, she nodded. With one last look, she turned and disappeared into the trees, her glowing form fading like mist at sunrise. Duran stood alone in the clearing, waiting until he couldn't hear her footsteps anymore. Then he turned and ran toward the sound of the searchers crashing through underbrush, making enough noise to draw them away from the glade. He met them near the edge of the forest. They looked tired and worried, but relieved to see him. Daran forced a smile, saying he had gotten lost, followed a wrong path, nothing serious. They didn't ask too many questions. They were just glad he was safe. No one spoke of glowing figures or silent beings. No one asked if he had seen anything strange, and he didn't tell. Days passed, then weeks. Daran returned home, but his heart stayed behind. The city felt louder than ever. The buildings felt taller, but emptier. He moved through his days like a shadow, speaking only when needed, thinking always of the forest. He kept the notebook close, flipping through the pages each night like a memory he couldn't let go. He knew he couldn't go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The risk was too great. If others followed, if the wrong people found her world, it could be destroyed. So he waited and watched and protected her story by keeping it quiet. Years later, a child walking through a quiet part of that same forest found something strange. Stones arranged in a perfect circle, each one carved with faint glowing marks that shimmered in the twilight. She stood there for a long time, her hand brushing over the patterns, feeling something she didn't understand. From the corner of her eye, she thought she saw movement, a figure tall and silent watching from the trees. But when she turned, there was nothing. Just the sound of leaves moving gently in the breeze. Back in the city, Daran sat on his porch, now older, the notebook still on his lap. He looked toward the horizon, where the forest lay far away. A soft breeze passed over him, and for a moment he could almost hear the sound of her voice. Like wind through the leaves. Like light speaking without words. He closed his eyes and smiled. He had made a promise that day in the glade. A promise to protect what could not protect itself. A promise made in silence but held stronger than any oath. He had kept that promise. And though he never saw her again, he knew she was still there, somewhere beneath the canopy, watching and waiting. A part of her world lived on in him. And maybe, just maybe one day it would live on in others too.